In January of 2023, cinemas were invaded by Megan, a horror comedy about a feisty and murderous android companion that brought a fun new spin to the killer doll genre. While the film was a surprise hit at the box office, it had been in development for quite a while, dating back to the pre-pandemic days of 2018. Intriguingly, its director, Gerard Johnstone, had only one feature film under his belt up until that point. That feature was Housebound, a twisty, humorous thriller that deftly combined chills with laughs. Megan producers James Wan and Jason Blum were both thoroughly impressed by the tightrope the movie walked and found Johnstone was perhaps the only man for the job of bringing the bonkers Megan concept to life. Turns out their faith in him was rewarded, as the dancing doll racked up over $170 million at the worldwide box office, earning her a sequel almost immediately. But we're here to look back at the project that made Megan possible, Johnstone's funny freak-out Housebound, one of the best horror movies you never saw. Obviously, we're going to be spoiling some of Housebound's bigger plot twists, so do be advised that you should best watch it first, then come back here to enjoy us lavish praise upon the flick, which starts off with a truly frightening scenario, moving back in with your mother and stepfather.
You jagaloons! You're failures! Failures!
You're embarrassing yourself, you geriatric fuck!
That's the fate that has befallen Kylie Bucknell, a 20-something delinquent who finds herself under house arrest after a ludicrously failed attempt at ATM theft. Kylie is a sullen, surly young lady with a chip on her shoulder the size of Auckland. Her mum, Miriam, is a well-meaning sort, if not a little excitable. And stepdad Graham is almost as hard to read as she is. Safe to say, this will be no stay-at-home vacation, but rather a true endurance test. Kylie very well may have preferred prison to the creaky confines of her childhood home. However, it's not just going to be endless days on the couch watching meaningless telly for Kylie. Miriam has a rather unfortunate surprise for her daughter. The house is currently haunted. In fact, it may always have been haunted, as when she was young, Kylie was convinced herself that she saw apparitions, memories she's since blacked out. Of course, there are the usual mysterious disturbances in the middle of the night, creaks and house sounds, the so-called haunting presenting itself slowly, but surely. It takes a lot to convince a cynic like Kylie, who's more apt to believe her mother is equal parts bored and superstitious, than take any of this nonsense seriously. But it isn't long before it becomes clear to Kylie that something is indeed afoot in the old homestead. Getting grabbed on the leg by an unseen intruder will have that effect, as will having a creepy animatronic bear placed in the shower with you. Gotta think that guy's related to Megan in some way? Pretty soon, the evidence is impossible to ignore. But is it an unhappy spirit? Or something even more sinister? Is it even something to be feared at all? With the help of an eager amateur ghost hunter, who is also conveniently the guy who makes sure she doesn't try to skip down, Kylie and Miriam endeavor to get to the bottom of just what's happening within that house. And when we say within that house, we mean it. While watching Housebound, it's easy to see why producers James Wan and Jason Blum, and even that legendary Kiwi Peter Jackson, were impressed with Johnstone's work and pictured bigger things for him. Balancing comedy and horror is never for the faint of heart, and Gerard does an expert job of crafting a thriller that's both creepy and amusing. Sometimes it's even downright quaint. You might get an Amblin vibe from the flick, as it certainly calls to mind those special Spielberg-produced thrill rides from the 80s that seamlessly blend spooky subject matter with enthusiastic humor and heart. As a writer, he presents us with a great premise. What if you literally couldn't leave your haunted home because you'd be breaking the law? And as a director, he proves he's got a gift for visual storytelling with a steady supply of interesting camera movements and angles. Housebound is never boring to look at, and the cinematography and production design teams deserve kudos for delivering such an appealing-looking movie, considering it rarely ever leaves the confines of the house. The influence of gothic horror movies of the past is frequently obvious, as shadows lurk everywhere and dark corridors present themselves with startling regularity. Especially noteworthy is that, despite some grim subject matter at the core of the plot, Housebound is rather lighthearted and easy to watch. One of those horror movies that will appeal to aficionados as well as people who don't normally enjoy the genre. That's not to say it's toothless. Indeed, there are lots of teeth flying around this film. You don't normally see dentures being used as a major plot point in a horror movie, but that's just how Johnstone rolls. And admirably, there's very little gore or violence in this movie. Well, okay, there are a few stabbings here and there and maybe a mauled face. But the major bloodletting comes courtesy of an exploding head at the end that has to be seen to be believed. What a show-stopping moment that is. Johnstone makes some risky choices early on, most of them regarding our main character. What's rather nifty here is that Kylie is anything but a likable protagonist in the early going. Sour-pussed and ungrateful, she's still acting like an angsty teenager even though she's well into her 20s, and before long, she's all but taken over the house and treating her mom and stepdad like unwanted roommates. Johnstone, of course, does this purposely, giving Kylie a tough, unflappable veneer so that when things really start going bump in the night, her defenses are broken down and she gradually grows into a character you care about. And if she's scared, you know that things are going downhill. It doesn't hurt that Morgana O'Reilly is really just perfect in the role, imbuing Kylie with a snarky sense of humor and a give-no-shits attitude that will be like catnip if you're into ladies who look like they can kick your ass. I know I am. Like plenty of notable actors before her, Morgana cut her teeth on the Australian soap opera Neighbours, but even if you're familiar with that series, you'll have no trouble associating her with this role right from the get-go. So effortlessly does she make Kylie her own. But the whole cast is uniformly excellent. Rima T. Wayata is completely lovable as the put-upon mom. She hits all the right notes and will hopefully have you reaching for the phone to call your own mom in no time, provided you don't already live with her. Glenn Paul Waru provides solid comic relief as a security officer who just so happens to be a big believer in the supernatural. And his addition to the increasingly weird proceedings is very welcome, especially for those who enjoy a little amateur ghost hunting on the side. The moment where it's revealed a presumably skeptic Amos is actually all in on this haunted house stuff is a priceless one. And very special notice must be given to Cameron Rhodes, who plays Kylie's gentle therapist, Dennis. Initially, what seems like a minor supporting character becomes so much more intriguing as the movie enters its third act. And let's just say Rhodes has a hell of a time going over the top when we discover Dennis has some skeletons of his own in the closet. Then there's the other member of the cast, the elephant in the room, or the man on the walls if you prefer. Here comes a spoiler. It's ultimately revealed that there's no ghost in the mix, nor is it a frightful intruder intent on making life hell for the Bucknells. No, it's just a poor soul named Eugene, a former mental patient traumatized by a murder from the past and relegated to years of solitary confinement within the walls of the Bucknell house. Eugene ends up being a very sweet character, in his own unglamorous way, and he certainly ends up being useful to his hosts when their backs are literally up against the wall. Putting an extra charming capper on the film, we learn that Eugene will continue to live with the Bucknells as a most unusual house guest. And while I don't know if I personally would feel comfortable with such an odd living arrangement, it does the heart good to know Eugene and his surrogate family will go on looking after each other. Though one has to assume drawing Kylie while she's in the bathtub is no longer permitted. If there's a complaint to be lodged against Housebound, it's that it might be just a tad on the long side, with the second half devoting a lot of time to exposition and red herrings. 110 minutes is a touch lengthy for a horror comedy, but honestly, this is a minor gripe, as Johnstone keeps things moving with characters we're genuinely invested in entering suspenseful, sometimes harrowing situations. He manages to pepper the film with several standout sequences. Let's put it this way. Whenever Kylie goes about exploring on her own, you're guaranteed an exciting experience. It might be slightly controversial to say, but Housebound belongs in the same conversation as other great horror comedies of the 21st century, alongside titles like Shaun of the Dead and What We Do in the Shadows. It may not have made quite the cultural impact as those movies, but it's just about as much of a pleasure to behold. An unorthodox story, well told by a very talented filmmaker, here's hoping Housebound's profile continues to rise in the film community, especially in the wake of Megan Fever. Heck, maybe Housebound will get a sequel of its own one day. Would be plenty interesting to see what's going on in that house after all this time.
Welcome to the best horror movie you never saw, where we shine a light on horror movies that you may have missed, haven't seen in a long time, or just plain forgot about. In this episode, we're diving into 1987's Stepfather as it explores one of the most terrifying notions of them all: having your parent get remarried.
Here's Johnny.
Oh, All kidding aside, the movie is thrilling in all of its simplicity, and the fact that the threat is within the home adds a sense of realism that was missing from most horror films released in the 80s. Led by a perfectly chilling performance from Terry O'Quinn, he's provided stellar support from Jill Schoelen and Shelley Hack as the actor's seemingly calm exterior begins to gradually melt away to show how truly unhinged he actually is. If anyone has had the experience of having a step-parent, you would be forgiven if this movie made you give them the side eye when they first enter your life. The Stepfather received very positive reviews upon release and has since gone on to become a cult classic, but it appears that difficulty in how to promote the release could have been what led to its muted box office performance when it first hit theaters.
Father knows best.
Why did it take so long for The Stepfather to find an audience? Let's explore that and more as we dive headfirst into one of the best horror movies you never saw. I want to thank you guys for watching the best horror movie you never saw and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like the video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. The fact that The Stepfather's best attribute is its eerie realism might have a lot to do with the inspiration behind the film. The story is loosely based on John List, and it's a tale that is far more frightening than any horror movie you could really see. On November 9th, 1971, List killed his wife, mother, and 3 children at their home in Westfield, New Jersey. The murders were planned with such care that when he disappeared, nearly a month had passed before anyone suspected the crime had occurred. The now mass murderer would go on to assume a new identity, get remarried, and eluded capture for nearly 18 years. His motive alluded to critical financial problems and the idea that his family was straying away from their religious faith. List believed that by murdering them, it would guarantee their souls a place in heaven. It's a twisted story, but aspects of it did shape the DNA of what eventually would become the film. Carolyn Leftcourt, who was working as a story editor for Walt Disney Pictures at the time, showed the article about John List to writer Brian Garfield. Once he saw the story, they brought in novelist Donald E. Westlake to help them shape the film's script. The basics of the story would be about a man who is betrayed by the American dream, and when he doesn't achieve that ideal, he kills and starts over until he does.
Rest in peace, Doctor.
Terry O'Quinn's Henry Morrison is first seen washing off blood in the bathroom after slaughtering the family he'd been living with. We eventually learn that he assumes a different identity to find the perfect family, and when they don't live up to his standards, they're fair game for murder. He lives by the motto of, when at first you don't succeed, dust yourself off and try again. By the time we meet him again 1 year later, he's a real estate agent named Jerry Blake, living a pretty cushy life in the Seattle suburbs. Blake also has a new family to call his own as he's married widow Susan Main, played by Shelley Hack, and becomes the stepfather to her daughter Stephanie, played by Jill Schoelen.
Yay.
As some kids are when their parents decide to remarry, Stephanie has a strained relationship with Jerry, and that's confided to her psychiatrist, Dr. Bondurant. She's advised to give him a chance, but as most horror films have taught on a frequent basis, you should always trust the misgivings of kids. They see things that most adults don't. By the very nature of horror movie 101, they're just always smarter and shouldn't be pushed aside for overacting. Making things a bit more difficult is that Stephanie has behavioral issues at school. Her strained relationship with Jerry could be viewed as teenage rebellion.
Listen, sweetheart, it seems like you and I are butting heads all the time.
It's not long, however, before his past begins to catch up with him and his pleasant facade begins to crack. Even as he tries to eliminate the obstacles getting in the way of his happy home, Jerry begins to realize that this family just won't do either, and it's time to move on to the next one. Director Joseph Rubin got to really flex his thriller muscles on this particular project. He first found out about the film after reading an early draft of the script, and he immediately was drawn to it because of just how deliciously good the bad guy was. While the things that he's doing are fundamentally evil, Rubin thought that what made him interesting was that he wanted what we all want: a beautiful home, a beautiful family. His fantasy doesn't match reality, and he goes that extra mile when that fantasy isn't achieved. As a serial killer, there is more depth on display, and that's something Ruben was interested in exploring.
This is as good as it gets.
To bring this character to life, they needed to find the right actor, but it proved to be a difficult task. Most actors that read the script didn't want to play this guy because he was that rotten to the core. Ruben had said that every name or semi-name they approached all turned them down. Thankfully, the stars aligned to find Terry O'Quinn because no one was suited to play this role other than him. He gives a performance that's all about nuance. You have to buy that he's pleasant and charming enough to fool Susan into marrying him, and then you have to believe the crazy that's boiling underneath the surface. This is someone who's a real estate agent. He needs a megawatt smile to make a sale. O'Quinn definitely has a natural likability that allows you to accept he could weasel his way into not only a family, but a whole community as well. I know he's had several other roles across his career that he's known for, particularly playing John Locke on the series Lost, but there is a strong argument to be made that this is his signature performance. Discussing the actor's choices further, even though O'Quinn was a relative unknown at the time, the director was always impressed with his choices. While doing the scene in the basement when he has to shift personas and completely lose it, he saw firsthand just how good he was. Jill Sholin discovers him in the basement as he truly shows some of the violence within him. He doesn't know that his stepdaughter is watching him, but when he hears her, he suddenly snaps out of it. Then he goes back to the facade he's been portraying as a nice guy and says,
Hi, honey.
Ruben recalled shooting that scene and said it was that particular scene when he realized he had a great actor having a truly fantastic moment. As you go through the movie, you'll notice that he has several moments like this, and during the now classic line reading of "Who am I here?" you can legitimately see his wires getting crossed and almost shutting down like a robot.
Wait a minute. Who am I here?
A performance like that takes a great deal of talent to get right, and you can tell he was up to the task. Filming on The Stepfather took place in Vancouver, Canada, beginning on October 15th, 1986, and the shoot was said to be pretty smooth by director Joseph Ruben. All of the performers were great, but he does admit there was a sense that they didn't know if they were making a good movie. They believe that they're certainly making something interesting and that it was different from the typical thrillers that were out there during the time, that they were dealing with some themes that may have not worked in lesser hands.
Hey, I thought this was supposed to be a party.
It's important to make everything appear as if nothing bad could happen in this town, so there is a sense of safety in the cookie-cutter appearance of the community and everyone living in it. It's the perfect image of the suburbs that is hiding pure evil within it. This adds a lot to the film's tension and unease. For instance, Jerry has repeatedly refused to meet Stephanie's psychiatrist, which makes Dr. Bondurant make an appointment with him in the guise of wanting to buy a house. The psychiatrist begins to ask too many questions, and Jerry assumes he's an undercover cop and proceeds to beat him to death. The scene is a nice slow build, and as an audience, we've been slightly fooled by Jerry's Norman Rockwell persona. This makes the sudden rage all the more shocking and proves that the movie's biggest strength, other than Terry O'Quinn, is keeping the audience off balance. Proving to be important to the project in her own right is Jill Sholin. Stephanie really is the voice of the audience. She knows something isn't right about her stepfather, and even though she's troubled, you still root for her to make others not so blind to what he's all about. It's also believable that her mind changes about him on the occasions he covers up his misdeeds. Stephanie is proactive in writing a letter to the newspaper when she reads the article about Jerry's earlier murders, believing her stepfather to be the man behind it all. She requests a photo of the person in question, but the letter is intercepted by Jerry. Once he places a stranger's photo in the letter, Stephanie begins to question her own suspicions. In another twisted case of bonding with his stepdaughter, having murdered her psychiatrist he claims was killed in a car accident, and actually accomplishes gaining a bit of affection from her.
He was a very special man.
It only quickly falls apart when Jerry goes grade A psycho after seeing his stepdaughter kissing her boyfriend Paul, who he accuses of trying to rape her. It's this argument that makes him determined to begin a new identity, because this is not the family he once hoped for. If not for the well-written and performed push and pull between these two characters, I don't think it would work as well as it does. New Century Vista Film Corporation secured distribution rights to the film in the fall of 1986. This was a new company started by Norman Levy, who was the former chair of 20th Century Fox. The Stepfather would be their first acquisition, and they had the daunting task of figuring out how to promote the finished product. Early test screenings were said to be very positive, which was encouraging for New Century. The decision was initially made to market the movie as a psychological thriller, but after opening in 105 theaters on January 23, 1987, the film grossed a mere $260,587. New Century attempted several different marketing campaigns that made the film first appear as an adult psychological thriller, but after 6 weeks of release, the grosses only reached $1.3 million. It was then decided to begin marketing the project as a slasher film to attract a younger audience, but that move didn't seem to work either. Keep in mind, this was 1987 and the slasher movie craze was being ruled by Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and Michael Myers. Younger audiences were used to these heavyweights, so a more cerebral psychological thriller would not be on their radar. As for why old audiences didn't respond, Levy speculated that a lack of major stars or a well-known director contributed to it not being much of interest to them. At its highest theater count, the movie was only in 148 locations, and the decision was made to not go wider because of its initial mediocre performance. By the end of its theatrical run, The Stepfather grossed a mere $2.6 million. It's a shame that The Stepfather couldn't translate solid reviews to a better box office performance because critics definitely liked what they saw. The Rotten Tomatoes score sits at an impressive 88%, and it was mostly praised as an engrossing suspense thriller. Terry O'Quinn was frequently cited for his amazing performance and his complete commitment to bringing a villain like this to life. The actor was nominated for both a Saturn and an Independent Spirit Award for his performance, while Joseph Rubin was honored with the Critics Award at the 1988 Cognac Festival. For her efforts, Jill Sholin was nominated for a Young Artist Award for her work in the film. Despite the original's muted box office performance, a sequel came to fruition in 1989, The Stepfather 2, also known as Stepfather 2, Make Room for Daddy in some parts, brought back Terry O'Quinn. Unfortunately, just about everything that made the first movie great was omitted. Jeff Burr stepped in as director, replacing Joseph Rubin, and the writing team was also missing in action, with the sequel being penned by John Auerbach. O'Quinn is joined in the film by Meg Foster, Caroline Williams, and Jonathan Brandis, but this endeavor ends up being a giant misfire. The problem with Stepfather 2 is that it follows familiar beats established in its predecessor, but it doesn't do them nearly as well. Terry O'Quinn is still a joy to watch, but you can see the project falling into slasher movie traps rather than being a smart psychological thriller. The sequel has its own interesting backstory in the sense that after a test screening, studio execs Harvey and Bob Weinstein, those guys, complained about the lack of gore and demanded reshoots. Jeff Burr refused to comply, and director Doug Campbell was brought in to do the reshoots. Terry O'Quinn also refused to take part in the reshoots, and Burr has said, quote, "They cut a little bit out and they added some badly done blood effects." Badly done because Terry O'Quinn refused to do it. Really, they were meaningless, so that was irritating. The sequel was originally intended to be a direct-to-video release, but the producers were somehow impressed by what they saw to go theatrical. So after getting a limited release, The Stepfather 2 died a quick death and ultimately grossed $1.5 million at the domestic box office. As for the critics, the film has a big, fat 0% on Rotten Tomatoes for all of its troubles. That reception didn't stop a third entry from getting made. Stepfather 3, also known as Stepfather 3 Father's Day, was released in 1992 as a made-for-TV movie. The biggest fault of the third installment is that it's missing Terry O'Quinn's performance. I'm not 100% sure if he was offered to return, but if he was, he wisely chose to sit this one out. Directed by Guy Megar and film stars Robert Whiteman and Priscilla Barnes, David Tom and Susan Hubley. Reviews were slightly better than that of the second movie, but it still wasn't warmly received in most circles. Entertainment Weekly gave it a D+ and said it was a poorly scripted, all too familiar chiller. They also called Robert Whiteman, who assumed the role of the titular character, robotic and a weak substitute for previous death-dealing dad Terry O'Quinn. While all of this was going on, the 1987 release gained a lot of traction as a cult classic. There could be a few reasons for this, but when Terry O'Quinn began playing John Locke on Lost in 2004, that series took off like a rocket, and the actor's work in that role was often highly regarded by fans and critics. There was a real curiosity about some of his other work, and I think this helped many more people discover the Stepfather as they explored his filmography. Might not be a direct science, but it's correlation worth exploring. For better or worse, the film's exposure as a cult classic resulted in The Stepfather getting the remake treatment in 2009. Directed by Nelson McCormick, the remake stars Dylan Walsh, Sella Ward, Penn Badgley, and John Tenney, and Amber Heard. Wonder whatever happened to her.
My dog stepped on a bee. We went to the vet.
Anyway, while this redo of the original is slickly made and has some decent performances, it can't help but be a pale imitation of the movie that inspired it. Dylan Walsh is a fine actor, but he lacked the nuances that made Terry O'Quinn so fun in that role. The film does pull a gender switch by making the daughter of the original now a son. There are some interesting things about the change that actually work. Seeing the son's perspective, as he would naturally be more protective of his mother as she enters into a new relationship, makes the film's flip not all that terrible, but it also strips away some of the vulnerability of having a daughter in that situation. Penn Badgley gives an adequate performance, but the end result finds the remake in the same position as most horror reboots during this time period. It all feels unnecessary, and you just want to shout out to the new generation that chose to see it to give the original their time instead. Released by Sony Screen Gems on October 16, 2009, the film debuted at number 5 in the box office with a gross of $11.6 million. With a budget of $20 million, the film wasn't a total bomb by the time it ended its run with $29.1 million at the domestic box office, but it was clear that it lacked staying power. Reviews were also dismal, registering at 11% on Rotten Tomatoes with a consensus that reads, "This tepid remake of the 1987 cult classic lacks the tension and satirical undercurrents of the original." The upside to the remake being made was that Shout Factory released the original film on DVD just 3 days before the debut of the reboot. A Blu-ray version would follow on June 15th, 2010, and this opened up the movie to be received by a brand new audience. For those who saw the remake and wanted to know if the source material was any better, they now had an easily accessible way to do so. Even though The Stepfather missed its true shot to be a hit upon release, the film still stands up as a world-class thriller that is much smarter than the time period it was released in would suggest. As we were being saturated with the numerous slasher sequels and wannabes, The Stepfather dared to do something different. Thankfully, over time, people have gradually discovered this twisted tale at obtaining the American dream at any cost. For anyone with a recent step-parent out there, look at this for notes on what to look out for so you don't end up with a psychopath living right under your nose. On this episode, we're probably showing you one that you definitely may have missed, and that's 2014's Starry Eyes. The film is written and directed by Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer and stars Alexandra Esso, Amanda Fuller, Fabian Thres, and Noah Segan. Starry Eyes is a blood-soaked cautionary tale that dives into the price of fame when it comes from sacrificing your identity in the name of ambition.
Don't make me beg here, because I will do it.
Certain films are satirical and sometimes very funny deconstruction of the Hollywood machine, but this is more like a swift kick to the nuts of the film industry.
Damn, I'm good! Can you feel that? Huh? Can you feel it, Captain Compost?
Think Black Swan, but with the indie horror sensibilities. It might be a bit on the nose with some of its commentary, but the film represents another example of independent horror films being some of the most challenging and ambitious movies out there.
You love me! You really love me!
The movie really is about the chew 'em up and spit 'em out aspect of the industry that focuses on the grungier side of Hollywood stardom as our young starlet makes a virtual deal with the devil to succeed. Basically, it's what you'd imagine the film industry to be like in real life. I'm pretty sure we've lost count of how many deals with the devil have been made in Hollywood, but we know the usual suspects.
You're a fucking choir boy compared to me. A choir boy!
It shows the industry can turn a sweet girl into an egomaniacal monster, as we've seen many times with the rise and fall of certain young people in Hollywood. Movie making is sometimes called soul-sucking, and Starry Eyes drives that home in the ugliest way possible. Ready to make a deal with the devil and discover this darkly bizarre takedown of the Hollywood system? Well, let's get into it as we explore one of the best horror movies you never saw. I want to thank you guys for watching the best horror movie you never saw and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like the video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. When trying to make it in Hollywood, we're always looking for our big break. This is very true of our young ingenue, Sarah Walker, played by Alexandra Esso. Sarah is an aspiring actress who is stuck doing what most aspiring actresses are forced to do: wait tables. At a place called Big Taters, no less. It doesn't help that her friends are generally selfish, unsupportive, and pretentious hipster types that seem to be only looking out for number one. Erin, played by Fabienne Thérèse, is always trying to steal Sarah's roles, while her roommate Tracy and aspiring director Danny are generally apathetic to her situation. It's a bleak existence for Sarah as she tries to make it under the bright lights of Hollywood, but her fortunes change after one audition. Remember, guys, in Hollywood, it can take one big audition, and this one is going to be life-changing for Sarah in the most horror movie-inspired way possible. Sarah lands an audition for a film called The Silver Scream, and it's held by powerful production company Asterius Pictures. The casting director and assistant are not impressed with Sarah's performance during her big moment, and she's dismissed. Finally hitting her wall after constant rejection, Sarah heads to a nearby bathroom to scream and rip her hair out. Well, this is really what the casting director wanted, and she's asked to come audition again, this time with the infamous hair rip from the bathroom. Sarah's confused when she's dismissed again, but this is just the beginning of a wild ride into the industry for this would-be starlet. Sarah's called back for a second audition, but this time it's with the studio's head producer. This is when things start to take a darker Hollywood casting couch turn for Sarah. She's asked to perform certain favors for her new employer, and although she initially resists, she succumbs to the temptation of the fame and fortune she's so desperate to achieve. Remember, folks, this is a horror film, and these decisions come with a price. Sarah is set to undergo a truly horrific transformation that will cost her to lose everything and everyone she loves along the way. Starry Eyes becomes the very definition of be careful what you wish for. All of us have aspired for bigger and better things in life, but it becomes a matter of how much of our character we're willing to sacrifice in order to achieve those goals.
Oh, fucking trying to kill someone, you dick bitch!
Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer provide audiences with a truly visceral gut punch that never shies away from the violence that begins to follow Sarah. The fascinating thing about Starry Eyes is that the true horrors of the story don't even kick in until the third act. Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer do a good job of blending a darkly comedic tone with a general sense of unease that steadily builds throughout this truly bizarre journey. By the time we get to the climax, which features some terrific body horror that is a jolt to the system, it's wholly satisfying because the duo has invested us in this ride from start to finish. Speaking of the transformation, body horror films always make me squirm, and this one is no exception. Sarah subjects herself to a plethora of practical effects that aren't for the faint of heart. You'll find yourself wanting to turn away from the screen, but you're oddly compelled to keep watching the gruesomeness. Selling your soul for stardom is not an original concept by any stretch of the imagination, but here it offers up a very unnerving and dark tale about the industry essentially claiming your soul. Just point to any person who rose to fame in young Hollywood and you're bound to see shades of them in Sarah. Starry Eyes features some truly stellar camera work from cinematographer Adam Bricker. He visually turns Los Angeles into a frenzied wonderland that stands out in a way we're not really used to. How many times have we seen Hollywood and Los Angeles depicted in film and TV? There can be a sameness to the Los Angeles visual palette, but Bricker makes it feel like something we have never seen before. As Sarah starts to lose grip on reality, her surroundings change accordingly. You also get the sense that something is wrong with everyone in the city and not just Sarah. It's all very creepily askew, with something appearing to lurk at every turn. Starry Eyes is given an added audio assist with a pulsating 80s pop synth score from Jonathan Snipes that pulls you deeper and deeper into the insanity that Sarah is experiencing. Music actually plays an important role in the film and complements the visuals as things begin to spin more and more out of control. The score has an old school ambition, but it's also wonderfully fresh and becomes one of the film's many highlights. Displaying that insanity and doing a majority of the heavy lifting in Starry Eyes is Alexandra Essoe, who gives a revelatory performance as Sarah. Essoe was a relative newcomer at the time of the film's release in 2014, so it's very possible that the actress was able to easily tap into Sarah's frustrations about trying to make it in the film industry. Without her riveting portrayal, Starry Eyes simply wouldn't work. A lot is demanded of Essoe both physically and mentally, and she more than comes through with many haunting internal and external distortions that show the change of her character to the very core. The supporting cast, including Noah Segan, Fabian Thérèse, and Amanda Fuller, all put in solid work, and it's a testament to all of them that they're given moments to create fully realized characters that make Sarah's descent into madness all the more heartbreaking. Noah Segan's character role as Danny is particularly interesting. It's hard to gauge what his intentions are, but he seems nice enough. The journey to get Starry Eyes made is similar to Sarah's desire to find her big moment in Hollywood. After writing the script, Widmeyer and Kolsch sought partial funding for it through a Kickstarter campaign that attracted actor Pat Healy to the project, who plays Sarah's well-meaning boss in the film. Dennis Widmeyer and Kevin Kolsch successfully hit their goal of $50,000 before their deadline and ultimately raised $52,614 with 393 backers attached. Filming took place on Starry Eyes in Los Angeles in May 2013 over an 18-day period. Starry Eyes had its world premiere on March 8, 2014 at South by Southwest. The film was generally well received by critics, scoring a 74% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 23 reviews. The consensus reads, Starry Eyes pokes Hollywood's seedy underbelly to produce a refreshingly original horror story led by a breakout performance from Alex Essoe. Time magazine called the film one of the 10 best films of South by Southwest the year it premiered, and in a review written for Fangoria, Samuel Zimmerman said, Kolsch and Widmeyer are clearly attuned to the pitch-black nature that consumes Sarah, but like the alluring score, there's something stirring in her eventual transformation of living through an actor's worst cosmetic nightmares and still forcibly taking what she wants. Most of the people associated with Starry Eyes have gone on to do great things. Alexandra Essoe, who had her first lead role in the film, has collaborated several times with horror director Mike Flanagan. Essoe played Wendy Torrance in 2019's Dr. Sleep, and she had supporting roles in the series The Haunting of Bly Manor in 2020 and Midnight Mass in 2021. Needless to say, her acting career has fared far better than Sarah's. Noah Segan already had some name recognition for some of his work with Rian Johnson, beginning with The Brick in 2005, and it's a partnership that has continued with roles in Looper, Star Wars The Last Jedi, and Knives Out.
That means she's lying!
Dennis Widmeyer and Kevin Kolsch arguably became horror filmmakers to watch after Starry Eyes made its debut, and certainly put them on the radar to helm 2019's remake of Pet Sematary. The project brought them back to the South by Southwest Festival when the film made its premiere on March 16, 2019. While reviews from critics were mixed, Pet Sematary went on to gross $113.1 million at the box office office worldwide on a very slim $21 million budget. Starry Eyes was released February 3rd, 2015 on DVD and Blu-ray. Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer recorded an audio commentary for those of us that still listen to them, and it provides more insights into their ideas and filmmaking techniques for the film. Starry Eyes isn't the best horror movie you never saw because it was met with very little fanfare. It's just simply one of those films you need one friend to recommend before you begin passing it along to others that will dig this wickedly smart story. The movie is a startling examination of blind ambition that has its roots grounded in a very real story about the price of fame. Sometimes there can be horrific results if we pursue notoriety by any means necessary.